Compromise. The leaders accepted three proposals I put forward, that is, disembarkation platforms outside Europe, a dedicated budgetary tool in the next MFF to combat illegal migration, as well as boosting EU support for the Libyan Coast Guard. On top of that, we have sent a clear message to all vessels, including those of NGOs, operating in the Mediterranean, that they must respect the law and must not obstruct the operation of the Libyan Coast Guard. This demonstrates our clear and univocal support for the actions of the Maltese authorities. Another part of the compromise is the Franco-Italian proposal of controlled centers on EU territory in countries that are willing to build them. All the measures in the context of these centers, including relocation and resettlement, will be taken on a voluntary basis. Last but not least, we agreed to launch the next tranche of financing for Turkey and to transfer 500 million euros of development money to the EU Trust Fund for Africa. Moving on to this morning's proceedings, the Euro Summit agreed, as promised in December, to progress on the completion of the banking union and to strengthen the European Stability Mechanism, including by providing the backstop to the Single Resolution Fund. This reform of the EMU will strengthen the euro and, as a result, also our union. In turbulent times, this is welcome news for all Europeans. On Brexit, the EU27 has taken note of what has been achieved so far. However, there is a great deal of work ahead, and the most difficult tasks are still unresolved. If we want to reach a deal in October, we need quick progress. This is the last call to lay the cards on the table. Before concluding, let me thank my good friend, Prime Minister Boyko Borisov, for the outstanding and effective Bulgarian presidency. You and your team have done a truly remarkable job, including on the Sofia summit, which was a historic moment in terms of our relations with the Western Balkans. Thank you very much, Boyko.
Thank you. And now the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker.
Yes, President Tusk, Draghi, Boyko, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying how grateful the Commission is for the efficient work of the first Bulgarian presidency ever. I have Bulgarians in my team, mainly the deputy spokesperson, Mina, so I knew that they are highly efficient, sometimes too efficient. And Boyko has a great performance behind him, because this was the first Bulgarian presidency in difficult circumstances, and he did it very well, with efficiency, with his special kind of humor, and with his way to bring people together. So a great job, Boyko, and thank you for that. We had a long night, so Donald is tired. And he did it well, because this was a particularly difficult European Council. We were discussing trade, und beim Thema Handel hat sich der Europäische Rat geschlossen gezeigt.
The European Council showed a resolved united front on all counts. Europe continues to stand for fair trade, free trade, trade based on trust, common rules and reliable partners. And we continue to be of the view that a multilateral approach is the right one. We feel that unilateral approaches would be misleading, and There are due to be discussions taking place before the end of July. I'll be going to Washington, taking up the President Trump's invitation. And it's just around the corner, the 21st and 22nd of July. I made this point in the European Council. I said I wanted to test where the leaks come from, and that's why I gave the wrong date. And I was successful in that endeavour, because that wrong date was passed straight on to the press. Because you always have to rely on information based on first hand, however. I would like to point out that it's not going to be on the 24th of July. It will be in the summer, picking up on the comments made by President Trump at the G7 summit. That is, if you take everything together, if you calculate everything together, trading goods, the American multilaterals make profits in Europe, and the situation looks quite different from the services point of view, where we're on the losing side, not our American friends, and we will be ensuring that those points are put across very clearly to our colleagues in Washington. As regards the euro area, now speaking French, I'm very pleased that progress has been made regarding the banking union, and I'm particularly pleased that the creation of a backstop, which is to be effective for the Single Resolution Fund, has been established. And I'm delighted to note that the European Council decided that in due course, the European stabilization mechanism will be made into a crisis mechanism which will ultimately be enshrined within the framework, the legal framework of the European Union. As regards budget instruments, we didn't spend a lot of time discussing the Franco-German proposal for a budget for the euro area, but as regards the content of the form that the euro area budget could or should take, specific lines, a consolidated budget. On that score, there was agreement to the main features, the main characteristics of this budgetary approach. Since we need to put in place a mechanism which can withstand any asymmetric shocks. Asymmetric shocks can occur at any time. Cast your mind back, you'll remember that Spain, which is admired for its economic performance, Portugal, admired for its economic performance, and Ireland, a Celtic country, admired for its economic performance as well, were all particularly hard hit by the economic and financial crisis. And it can hit you overnight, and so what we need is an instrument which is dedicated to fighting against and defending us against such economic shocks. On migration, the President of the European Council has said almost everything on that, and I'm pleased to note that the Commission's proposal to refinance the Trust Fund for Africa was taken on board by the Council to the tune of 500 million euros. And I am happy to note that the discussion ran on for too long on the facility for Turkey, but now a final decision has been taken on that, for a second tranche of 3 billion to be paid to the organizations dealing with refugees in Turkey. When it comes to the protection of our external borders, our proposal to increase the number of our European officers on the ground by 2020 met with broad support. The proposal to raise it to 10,000.
Thank you. And now turning to the Bulgarian EU presidency and its Prime Minister, Boyko Borisov.
Dear Donald, Jean-Claude, I would like to thank you and your teams for the enormous support to us before and during our presidency. I'd like to also thank all Bulgarians who contributed to the presidency, ministers, assistants, experts. Of course, I'd like to thank everybody back in Sofia who were all patient and helped in the numerous meetings, including the summit of the 28 leaders on the Western Balkans, plus the leadership of the European Union. All this would be placed in doubt had we not achieved the results of today's Council, that is, to give a perspective to Macedonia and Albania. Had we not had all the patience and perseverance to achieve results with the contract between Bulgaria and the former Yugoslav Republic Macedonia. Our friends and neighbors in Greece and Macedonia did the same, which resulted in a change of Macedonia's name, which gives prospects to the country for the EU and for NATO, and which makes the Western Balkans a more successful region. The topic of connectivity in the Western Balkan now has over 11 projects for connectivity, for Erasmus, and so on. And just over half an hour ago, with my colleague Cyprus, we signed the contract between Bulgaria and Greece for an interconnector for liquid gas with the support of the Commission, both for this project and for the Balkan gas hub. We tried to be pragmatic. We had objectives that were feasible, and on most of them we either had progress or completed them. We had a strong start on the 2020 budget. We worked on strengthening democracy in the EU, and the whole of the legislation for the EP elections in 2019 was complete. We had a lot of debates on the banking union, and we achieved a success, and this is very important in view of the transatlantic challenges and the situations with Russia. And as well as the Eurozone countries, there are countries outside the Eurozone. But when we're talking about spare parts for cars, for example, a lot of them are manufactured in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, and a lot of them in Bulgaria. So we are indeed all in the same boat, and I do hope, as President Macron said, at a time of peace, when we are not in a crisis, to prepare the banking union and the Eurozone to face new possible crises and challenges. When we talk about the migration crisis, at a time when the migration pressure is much less, I'd like to say that the European Commission, the Council, and many countries made a lot of efforts, and the migration pressure was reduced a lot. Bulgaria can report zero pressure. Operational compatibility, the first military capabilities program, the fight against terrorism. We've had so many meetings and discussions on these subjects, and we have indeed achieved a lot. And now, despite the contradictions between the two doctrines on protecting Europe, I am very grateful that with everybody's contribution, we reached this consensus, this fragile consensus, I'd say, which does not solve the whole problem. We have international maritime law here, the Geneva Convention, so we need to know what the consequences are when we make specific proposals. At the same time, as Donald said, we are talking about hotspots and disembarkation platforms outside Europe, including closed centres within the EU, but on a voluntary basis. So we made a lot of efforts to balance everybody's interests, and I think the main proposals made by Bulgaria during its 6 months of the presidency were really successful. I'd like to also mention the social sector, Digital Europe. The results we achieved there are impressive. For all digital files, 9 out of 13 were closed with or there is a general approach reached in Council. So, to cut the long story short, I'd like to say, as humble as we are, we had a good presidency. We did not make errors. We were praised by all colleagues, so we set a good foundation for our Austrian friends, and I think this is a good basis for them to continue working just as we continued working on the basis of the Estonian presidency. So I wish every success to Austria. Tomorrow, together with Donald Tusk, we will be in Vienna to pass on the relay baton to Sebastian Kurz, and we continue working.
Thank you very much. The floor is now open for your questions. I believe the first hand I saw was the lady in the 5th row. Yes, please.
Bulgarian National Television, this is Slava Apostolova. I have both questions to President Tusk and Juncker. You already mentioned that Bulgarian presidency was very efficient, but what was the biggest Bulgarian contribution during these 6 months? And to Prime Minister Borisov, Господин Борисов, доближи ли?
Did Bulgaria came closer after the presidency to Schengen and the Eurozone? Did you manage to convince countries like the Netherlands, for instance, to change their position towards our membership in Schengen?
For me, it's obvious that when it comes to politics, the main achievement is, of course, Sofia summit and the political outcomes of the summit. This was a personal idea and initiative of Boyko Borisov. And I was skeptical in the beginning of our cooperation, but Prime Minister Borisov was so optimistic, energetic, convinced, and at the end of the day, he was right. I think it's absolutely clear why Sofia summit was so successful, at least in the region. I mean, it's maybe here in Brussels, it sounds not as obvious as in the region, but you know, it's enough to ask our friends in Skopje, also in Greece, to understand that in Sofia, and thanks to Boyko Borisov, also before Sofia summit, we achieved a very specific political breakthrough, also when it comes to the European future for the whole region.
I think the biggest performance of the Bulgarian presidency was that the Bulgarian presidency was always sharing the wisdom of the Commission's proposals. that's a major performance, because from time to time it's not so easily doable when a country is in the presidency. We work together like brothers. And that was true when it came to the Sofia summit. One real big performance of the Bulgarian presidency is the fact that Bulgarians changed the atmosphere in the Western Balkans, because the European perspective became by far more credible during Boyko's leadership. And then a big progress was made as far as the asylum decisions are concerned, because out of 7 legislative proposals the Commission did propose back in February 2016, 5 have been more or less adopted, 5 difficult pieces of legislation. So everything was fine.
And of course my speech in Bulgarian, this was also maybe the biggest success, at least on our side, the institutions.
Just in a couple of words to reply to the question, both the European Commission and European Parliament, all members of the Council know that Bulgaria complies with the Schengen criteria. Everyone in their interventions give Bulgaria as an example with regard to protection of external borders of Schengen. And all Schengen member states have much more problems and non-compliance or not managing to tackle with Schengen. Yesterday we saw what happens when someone tries to impose a veto on everything and on all, how unpleasant it is, and what is the most democratic governance is placed at risk, because it can exist and work only based on mutual compromise, mutual understanding, tolerance among all the 28. And I believe, and my colleagues are going to confirm, that between the Netherlands and Bulgaria there are very good relations, very good climate. We work slowly because they get convinced every next day with their visits to Bulgaria and to sections of the border and visiting different parties throughout Europe. They get convinced that we are doing well. Yesterday we talked with Mr. Buma at the European People's Party. Even when I go to the Dutch Parliament, they don't believe me, but I saw it with my eyes because I stayed for 2 days at the border. So let's be calm, let's be tolerant. We have made our homework for the ERM2, for the waiting room of the Eurozone. Yesterday you saw the foreign debt of Bulgaria was lowered by 1% yesterday, and we have now 24% foreign debt. What can the other member states say about this? We can, of course, knock on the doors and ask them when they are going to reduce their foreign debt, because now we are ranking second after Estonia. So we have very stable fiscal reserve, golden reserve. 22 years we've been living under the currency board exchange regime, and we have proven we can protect our budget deficit. Now we have excess GDP of about 4%. What else do we need to do? We comply with all the criteria. And now if they try to invent new criteria about Schengen, this won't be fair. We just want to take part, to exceed a system under the criteria like the others, instead of inventing new procedural tricks, etc. And I hope they are not going to do it this time.
Thank you. Now turning to the lady in the last row. Yes, please, Gabriela. Gabriela, yes, please.
Thank you, Gabriela Baczynska, Reuters. President and Prime Minister, you also discussed transatlantic trade and the transatlantic relations more broadly, and that comes at a time when President Trump is saying the EU has been created to undercut the US, and at the same time he's going off to meet the leader of North Korea and Russia's President Vladimir Putin. So how does that make you feel about the transatlantic relationship and your relationship with President Trump?
Jean-Claude, I think it's about trade.
I could reply if you want first.
Vas-y.
if you don't want to touch the topic.
Jean-Claude. Okay. As it seems, I'm the only one who has to answer that question, but I am working in full harmony with the President of the European Council, with my friend Donald. I will go to Washington, and as I said, I will present the European point of view. I don't like this idea. Sometimes I'm suspecting the American administration to have to divide the European Union into different member states when it comes to trade. This is a competence of the European Union and thus of the European Commission. I will not comment on other contexts the American president may have, but when it comes to Europe, we have to show that we do exist, that we are united, and that we are presenting and member states and the Commission and the President of the Council exactly the same view. So we should de-dramatize these relations. We need these relations. The US needs these relations. I'm not sure that we will find an agreement between the US and the European Union, but we'll try.
Thank you.
President Tusk, can we also ask for your comment on, what do you make of
well, I don't spoil this good atmosphere, and I don't want to demobilize Jean-Claude Juncker before his visit to Washington.
Thank you. So we turn to the next question. I saw the gentleman here to the left in the third row. Yes, please, Danny.
Hello, Danny Kemp from AFP. On the hello, hi. On the migration conclusions, I was just wondering if you can explain a bit more about how this is to the presidents and the prime minister as well, how these migrant processing centres are actually going to help Italy and Greece in particular, when it seems by all accounts that no other countries are actually interested in hosting them at all. We've seen President Macron saying that he'd refuse this because it's not a country of first arrival, and we've seen Prime Minister Kurz saying that of course Austria won't host one because we're not a first arrival country unless people jump from parachutes. So how is that actually going to help Greece and Italy when no one else apparently wants to have these centres? Thank you.
The only method to help Italy, Greece, but we should talk about whole Europe, because we have still problems when it comes to this traditional eastern route from still Turkey today through Albania and Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have some new influx there also. It means that it's not only a central Mediterranean problem. The only method is to stop, or at least to reduce the illegal migration on our external borders. And in fact, if we compare the figures to this peak of influx in 2015, then we will see that we effectively reduce the numbers more or less in 90%, and only because of our common action on our external borders, cooperation with Libyan Coast Guard, our cooperation with third country, and of course our deal with Turkey. Anticipating, your question about this new project, I've prepared some kind of glossary of basic terms to understand better what we were talking about. First, disembarkation platform outside Europe, which is what I proposed. It is a place for secure processing, and the main aim is to disembarked migrants saved in search and rescue operations, distinguish economic migrants from genuine refugees, then return migrants and resettle refugees. For its implementation, we require the cooperation of UNHCR, IOM, and third countries. It could be, and I am absolutely sure that it will be, the most effective method to break the smuggling business model, to discourage smugglers, but also potential migrants to use this very risky way, I mean the route using vessels on the Mediterranean Sea. And also our idea to dedicate money for our action against illegal migration. It could help us to be much more effective, and especially I'm talking about more effective using our money than in the previous time. For this we need to start our negotiations with third countries in Africa, transit countries, but also countries of origins. And this is a sort of political breakthrough, because this is the first time when I felt, during our yesterday debates, that today we can really talk about establishment of an effective control on our external borders as a real and highest political priority for European member states. And it's still very controversial. Nothing is easy in this context. But finally, I saw determination and unity also on this still very difficult and controversial initiative.
Могу ли аз да допълня нещо?
May I add something? You mentioned Greece and Italy only, not Spain, not Bulgaria. Our Black Sea is just as warm and with millions of tourists at the moment as the Mediterranean, and our land border with Turkey is just as long as the one with Greece. There are two approaches here. The states that take on their commitments and deliver on them, invest money, tens, hundreds of millions, including aid from the European Union, as 150 million that we got, even though Greece has received 560 million. So we have been working, we have been implementing technology, we bought new vessels, all to counter migration. There are two approaches here. Within a year and a half, and I'm very grateful to Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker here, who came to Varna for the meeting with Erdogan when nobody wanted to talk to him. But the Turkey statement is working 100%. If we had done what I suggested back in 2015 to do what we did in Bulgaria everywhere, we would not be talking about this topic now. And this topic is a political topic now. It is not a migration crisis. It is a political crisis, because there are 90% fewer migrants than 2 years ago. A lot of systems are operational now, the Schengen information system, but the problem now is a political one. And when we talk about hotspots and disembarkation platforms, we have to find the practical way to implement them. And we stayed all night to discuss this, but that's how the European Union functions. There are ministerial councils, there is the Coreper, there are working parties, and the idea would be all these Sherpas, who they are called, the working bees, to have presented the solutions on the table, what is possible by the Geneva Convention. And when we say that we turn ships back to sea, what are the provisions of the Convention? How we could really be humane as well. And it's the experts that have to resolve this. We have hundreds of such experts in each one of our countries. And that's why we had this long talk and discussion yesterday. But that's why we have our interior ministers, that's why we have our services, we have Frontex. All these people could draft the solutions and present them. And instead of that, we started from zero and went on until almost 6 o'clock in the morning. So it's good to remember that Bulgaria was under more or less the same pressure. And I invite everybody to come and see how we guard the border. There are still migrants, but they are very, very few. So any one of you who's willing can come and see on the spot.
Donald wants me to tell you that I have to leave.
Okay. With that, I conclude the press conference.
Bye-bye.
Thank you once again.
Thank you once again.
What was the best intervention ever? The last one.